Welcome everyone to our first presentation on Cloud 101, Realizing the True Potential of Cloud Media Operations. I'm Peter Wharton. I'm the Director of Corporate Strategy with Tag Video Systems. So glad to have you all here. Dana is monitoring the chat. Dana, everything okay? Excellent. All right, so if you have any questions, feel free to ask them in the chat at any time, and we'll get to them in the end, I promise you. And hope everybody can hear me okay. All right, let's get going here. Perfect, thanks. So let's take a look here at Cloud 101. What are we going to be talking about during this session? So the first thing we'll be talking about is introduction is why the cloud. That's what we'll be talking about today. Why should you be considering moving your operations, media operations to the cloud? The second thing is the cloud there yet? Is the cloud really ready for what you want to do? And that depends on what it is you're trying to accomplish, but the cloud is definitely ready for some things and not quite ready for others, and we'll talk about those in the second chapter. In our third chapter, we'll talk about the challenges of migrating your workflows to the cloud and how to address them. In the fourth one, we'll actually go through a whole recipe for a successful migration. And lastly, in the fifth chapter, we'll talk about cloud system case studies. And then afterwards, we'll have a couple bonus sessions as well, looking at a couple of special things we'll talk about later. So first, let's get this out of the way. What do we mean by the cloud? Just to be clear, in these presentations, we're talking about public clouds like Amazon, AWS, Microsoft Azure, Google Cloud, IBM, and Alibaba. We're talking about places where you can actually run infrastructure as code, where you have infinite on-demand scalability and a wide range of instance types you can run your services on to optimize for what you're trying to do. We're talking about consumption-based costs, not infrastructure-based costs. So we're not talking about just leasing servers. We're talking about being able to actually pay for them just when you're using them as well. You know, if you lease a car, it sits in your driveway, you're still paying for it, right? The beauty of the cloud we won't really get to is what point where we're actually only paying for it to actually use it, more like a taxi cab or an Uber than it is like a leasing model. And of course, we want to be able to run our workflows in multiple geographic zones for lots of different reasons. A lot of it for resiliency, but also to run the workflow where it's most appropriate for a number of purposes we'll talk about. And so definitely what we're not talking about here is your private cloud or private data center. We're talking about public clouds here. So what is the problem we're trying to solve? This is a famous quote from Peter Dare of Sony, who's been very instrumental in SMPTE standards work, pictured here with Pat Griffiths and Merrill Weiss from SMPTE. So what is the problem we are trying to solve here? Well, the problem we really have is that we're constantly being forced to adapt to changing situations. You know, we made these changes, for example, most recently to uncompressed video over IP plants using SMPTE standards ST 2022-6 and 2110. We've adapted to things like high dynamic range and wide color gamut, improving picture quality. We've adapted to ultra high definition television, 4K, and now 8K TV is on the horizon, potentially. We're changing transmission methods. In the US, we're moving to ATSC 3.0 as well as a couple other places in the world. Others are looking at 5G. We're having to stand up on-demand linear channels as opposed to normal 24/7 channels. We're dealing with constantly changing formats to address the different changes we have in our workflows. SRT and RIS, for example, to get signals across the internet, or JPEG XS to reduce bandwidth without reducing latency. And of course, most exacerbated by the most recent COVID pandemic, is we're dealing with remote and at-home operations. So these are some of the kind of changes we're constantly having to adapt our operations and our workflows to. So where are we right now? Well, our industry is constantly being challenged by uncertainty. It's getting harder and harder to tell what's coming up next. Change is becoming a constant. Obviously, COVID-19 has generated some new production methods, remote production and such, but we're also having to manage content for long-tail delivery. You know, we're now trying to reach deep into our archives and repurpose old seasons and stuff, but the number of viewers is far smaller, so we need workflows that manage that as well. And we have to support new delivery systems. You know, in the US, we have virtual MPVDs that have shown up. We're seeing more and more OTT platforms and other things like that. And of course, those event-based channels we talked about a minute ago. So all of this raises the question of how well can you really predict the future? You know, We've seen traditional delivery versus OTT, and now we have linear channels versus event-based channels. We've been dealing with emerging technologies again, 5G, volumetric cameras, 8K, esports. I mean, esports, who saw that coming, right? You know, or autonomous vehicles, artificial intelligence, machine learning, VR and AR. But there are things we also didn't even see coming at all. Things like smartphones, really. You know, if you could have really predicted a smartphone, then BlackBerry would have won that business, but they didn't. Or smart speakers, virtual MPVDs. And then there are things we saw coming, but they didn't work out as planned. I mean, 3D television. A lot of customers built facilities planning to migrate to 3D that never happened. A lot of people built 3 gig HD facilities thinking that they were going to be building for 3D. That didn't happen. And of course, Google Glasses, another perfect example of something, a technology, even with all that money and the power of Google behind it, didn't work out. So it's really hard to predict these technologies. But the one thing you can be sure of is more and more now, consumers are in charge. The consumers are the king. And as Bob Iger, former executive chairman of Walt Disney Company said, actually I think he's still the executive chairman, he's not the CEO, consumers are now the ultimate authority to whom even kings must bend the knee. And consumers tend to be fickle. They tend to jump for the latest thing. They tend to change their minds. It makes it really hard to plan your business when your business is being dictated by the consumer like that. So in this age of uncertainty, it's hard to plan when you don't know where you're going. And technology is advancing faster than ever before. And consumers are driving constant change in business models. And the old model of purpose-built facilities doesn't fit this new dynamic. So what do? Well, for one thing, we can't build these purpose-built facilities anymore. As John Honeycutt, the former CTO of Discovery, said, infrastructure used to be an asset, now it's a liability. And in about 2014 or 15, he started Discovery down the road of migrating their entire operations into the Amazon AWS cloud. So he saw this coming. He really was the first media CTO in the industry to really move at scale, playout and workflow for an entire network into a cloud, and really pioneered that. And so I got the chance to speak to him at this conference in 2017, and they were still in the process of launching. You also see a couple other pioneers of the cloud down there. We were talking to Larry Kaplan, who runs SDVI, Usman Shakil with AWS, and Thomas Edwards. And Thomas Edwards at that time was with Fox Network. And I asked Thomas, so where will you be in 5 years with Fox Network? What are your plans? And he goes, anyone who can tell you where the media industry will be in 5 years is a liar. He did not really realize how much that was true, because at that time he was with Fox, and 6 months later Fox was part of Disney, and he was now at Disney, and now here today he's at Amazon AWS. So he's seeing this change. But what's interesting is the inability to, imagine him trying to build an infrastructure for Fox Network, and whatever he was building got thrown out the window when they merged with Disney, and those networks moved over to Disney. So how do you build when these business models are also constantly changing as well? So we need to scale and demand too to make this work. And this is where the cloud really helps, because we can scale not only up for big events, but we can also scale down. We can have things that don't work out or we don't need to spend as much money on. We don't have to guess the future size requirements. And we can match our infrastructure size exactly to demand. I've never seen a facility, when you think about it, where the SDI router wasn't maxed out, where there was no space left. Or worse, I've seen where they planned for expansion, but failed to populate the frames before the product was discontinued. Even moving to IP isn't really a magic bullet in this way, because we moved from 1 gig to 10 gig to 25 gig to 100 gig Ethernet networks, and soon to 400 gig network connections. So even that Ethernet infrastructure will be obsolete fairly quickly. We've also moved from HD interlaced at 1.5 gig to progressive at 3 gig to UHD at 12 gig, and now 120 hertz frame rates at 24 gig. And we even have customers talking about 8K uncompressed with high frame rate, which is 96 gigs for one signal. So you can imagine, even if you're moving to IP, building an infrastructure that foresees the future and is capable of handling that is almost a fool's errand. So how does the cloud help here? Well, it also aligns the cost to consumption. you can actually have with an OPEX-based model, your cost directly proportional to usage. That means you can have on-demand and bursty services or just using those servers and the resources when you need to. You can also have redundancy and resiliency that's matched to the value of that at that particular time. So for example, you might have systems where you have 1+1 redundancy on primary channels, 1+n redundancy on less important channels, and redundancy that even changes during times of day. Or for example, only having disaster recovery systems that are running when you need them. So it allows you to really preserve your capital, which allows you then to make investments and spend it where you need in the future as these changes occur, as opposed to spending it up front, hoping that the changes match your expectations. And for example, let's take a look at disaster recovery. Here's a true story I want to tell you about disaster recovery. This is a customer running a 48-channel satellite, delivered cable network group, and they had a 48-channel backup system for 1+1 redundancy. Pretty common, and a nice sized system. And to manage all this is a common management system and database system. And the problem was that this common management database system. And that meant when it came time to do a big upgrade that required a core change in that database, they had to change the database, which means they had to upgrade all 96 channels simultaneously. And there was no way to do that and stay on air. There was no way to do that safely. What if you did the upgrade and it didn't take and it didn't roll back the way you wanted? What then? How would you deal with that? I mean, because sometimes software does go through these massive upgrades, which is another problem we'll talk about in future chapters. So what they ended up doing was building a third 48-channel system with its own database. And on this one, they could test drive the new software and run it, and when it was running, cut over to this one, and then turn down the other ones, rebuild them all with a new versioning, and then turn them up, test it, and move back over to that one. That's a really expensive, cumbersome, and slow way to do things. Had it been in the cloud, you might have had a 48-channel main playout system with a database, and you might have had a 48-channel backup system where you only run up those backup channels as you need it. So now, first, I'm saving a lot of money because I'm only running backup servers as needed. I can do a lot of N+M here and not have all these servers just running constantly. And then for DR and upgrades, I can spin up a whole new system in the cloud. When I like what it's doing, I can cut over to it, and I don't have to refresh the old system. I just throw it away because I don't need it anymore. I'm now running on this new system. So how does the cloud also help? For one thing it does is it simplifies content exchange. You're connected to all your suppliers and you're connected to your distribution points all in the same environment. And that means you can have highly collaborative workflows with your employees, but also with third parties. You can share content with those partners by simply giving them direct access to specific things by specific users at certain times and only certain ways. You can manage access and content security much easier. And you can certainly make these connections with suppliers and distributors that really facilitate what we like to say at TAG, a zero friction model of operations. Makes it really easy to get work done. The cloud also helps us try new technologies. It reduces the cost, increases capabilities. We can test drive something. Maybe you want to test drive automated captioning and try a couple different workflows before you move away from your manually generated captions. Or there's big data and artificial intelligence you might want to apply to things. Maybe you want to test a different vendor for something that you're doing right now. I can spin up a whole other system and give it a test drive. I don't have to do physical infrastructure and do all that other work. I can just test it, and my content's already there. I can look at the signals. It's really easy. In fact, I tell you, you can do multi-vendor POCs. I did a playout project where we set up 10 vendors simultaneously in a POC. So this becomes much more doable than you could have ever done in an on-premise model. And you can build up to scale, test it, and tear it back down, as opposed to just testing it on a small system and hoping that that model works on the big system when you get there. So this try and decide model, where you can really fail fast, but you can test drive things. And I think this is one of the really beautiful things about the cloud that helps here. The other thing is you can actually locate your content where your sources and delivery are. So delivery used to be broadcast transmitters and satellites, and of course it still is in many cases, but it's more and more increasingly is OTT and internet delivery networks. So one of the things is you're now putting your content where your delivery network is. And that makes it more safer, makes it more secure, it also makes it more robust. And at the end of the day, it also saves you money. But what about television stations? I mean, television stations, they're getting all their feeds via satellite, and other ways they get those feeds and over terrestrial networks. They're creating all this a lot of content in their own facilities, and then they're feeding a broadcast transmitter, which is often co-located or nearby. They have an STL to feed over the air. Moving all that content to the cloud and bringing it back down, that can't make sense, right? That's not economical. And for many broadcast stations, this has been true for a long time, but it's starting to change. And the reason it's starting to change is because not only do I need to still feed my over the air, I'm doing a lot of work in the OTT now. I have my own platform. I have my own distribution. And more viewers are watching OTT. And I can get those feeds directly into the cloud via networks as opposed to putting up satellite dishes to do that. And in that case, maybe the cloud makes more sense, because now it actually allows me to do things like create a single workflow for all my delivery, create a real content creation factory that has a performant media supply chain underneath it. And with these unified workflows, I can create a lot more efficiency across the board. And because so much more of that distribution is now OTT, because of VOD, because of all the other channels I might launch in order to have access to more of my archive content and get money out of those past episodes and such. This is starting to make more and more sense even for broadcast stations. So this time, change is different when you move to the cloud. Our past technology shifts were really technology-driven decisions. The move to digital, to IP, to uncompressed over IP 2022-6 and 2110. And there was a premise here as we moved to IP, for example, that we'd have this common infrastructure of cabling technology and core data technology, and that our broadcast engineers could master and serve both IT and the media side of our business. And the shared infrastructure, network, cabling, virtual server farm, and data center would create economies and scalability. But when we invented 22.2-6 and 2110, we realized we needed many of the performance characteristics of SDI. We needed extremely low latency. And we needed absolute image and sound quality that only uncompressed can provide. So we ended up creating a network that is really nothing like a traditional IT network, with requirements for wire speed, non-blocking switching, no buffering, and incredibly precise timing. And the premise of then using our common IT platform for media and office evaporated, because nothing else besides live video is going to transit on our 2110 networks fabric because of both risk and cost. So we are still in this bifurcated world where our IT side and our broadcast and media side do not share a common platform. And so as we look at this, we had this transition from SDI to IP. And we wanted to get to Ethernet because we wanted this common topology. And at the same time, we've also been doing this transition from being broadcast industry-specific hardware to virtualized software-based applications that run on servers. And this has been a big change for us. So the first one, moving to IP, is a technology shift that reduced wiring, hopefully, created greater scale, and some improved flexibility. And the shift to software has also increased agility, utilization, and serviceability, because now we can actually run different things on different servers, but we don't actually do that a whole lot. I mean, we are doing some of that more and more, and we're starting to see this. And the beauty of this also is we can have a common platform, so we're not locked in by the hardware we bought necessarily. But this time the change is different. As we move to the cloud, okay, we're also doing a shift from CapEx to OPEX. This is really a business-driven decision, not a technology-driven decision. And it's about risk and cost management, and it's maximizing business enablement. So we must plan our cloud migration based on understanding business objectives and rules, not simply the technology that's being deployed. So as we add the cloud to this picture, what we really see is we're moving to the cloud to maximize business agility and enable these new opportunities. and realize the full potential of IP and software workflows that we can only get partway through in a virtualized environment. But this isn't really only a business decision. I'll tell you a little story here. This is a place called Television City in Los Angeles, CBS Television City. Some of you may be familiar with it. A beautiful, 50s deco building where a lot of famous television shows have come out of. And if you ever visit there and visit into the lobby, in the waiting room, looks like a dentist waiting room, but it's the lobby at Television City. The one thing that's very different is this coffee table in the middle of the room, because in this coffee table in the middle of the room is a master control switcher. And this master control switcher was hand-built by CBS Laboratories. And it was built way a long time ago because it was the very first master control switcher ever made. And it went on the air in September of 1961. It was the only audio follows video master control switcher at that time. And it stayed on the air, unmodified from the original design, until they finally took it off the air. And they took it off the air in October 2003. It stayed on the air for 42 years. And that is really emblematic of the culture of the broadcast industry until the advent of HDTV, where it was really something that was a lot of tinkerers, a lot of mad scientists, a lot of real engineers who were designing and building equipment. I even did that myself when I worked for a network design and built my own equipment to do things. And it really was that kind of innovation that existed at that time. But that doesn't really get us where we want to go today, does it? Because we really can't keep things on the air for 42 years for one thing, So moving to the cloud isn't just about a technology shift. We're now serving the customer controlled programming requirements. And this is a business decision to move to OPEX, to be able to support these rapid changes. But it's also a cultural change. We're moving from this never ever fail model that was endemic in the broadcast industry. When I grew up in the broadcast industry, if it failed, you got fired. Well, now the model is fail fast. Now the model is test drive things, make them fail, find out how they fail. Failing is a good thing because it helps us understand and move on from it. Not that we should build systems that fail on air, but this concept of actually testing things to see where they actually fail is different than what we've done in the past. And this is also a technology transition, of course, with requiring new technology skills and a new lexicon. And it requires collaboration and consensus from across all departments and disciplines in your organization. No more silos. You really need to get everybody involved as you move to the cloud. So coming up, we're going to be talking more and more about this. First thing we'll talk about is the cloud technology ready. Is it reliable enough? Is the latency going to be an issue? What media workflows can I actually move to the cloud? And when I move these workflows to the cloud, what are the challenges I'm going to have? About technology selection, vendor evaluation selection. That's a really important thing and something that's not well understood. How do I project costs? That's a really complex question. And how do I build a DevOps model that allows me to transition to that culture where I can have this fast fail, where I can test drive new things, and where I have ways of actually really making this work? So we're going to be having several more episodes. On March 16th, we'll be talking about whether the cloud is really there yet. On April 13th, the cloud migration challenges. On May 13th, recipe for successful migration. And on June 15th, cloud system case studies. We'll also be having a parallel series we'll be doing in TAG, and with my colleague Paul Briscoe, on understanding OTT. So I hope you'll join him starting March 3rd. So I thank you all, and let's see if we have any questions. All right, so our curator Dana has told me we've got some questions in the chat, so here we go. Let's take a look at some of these. First up, financially, I understand why moving to the cloud is the right decision, but I don't think what the cloud technology has to offer today can support live production. Well, let's take that in two parts. First, let's look at the financial side of this. Moving live production to the cloud could potentially be very attractive. After all, live production is one of these itinerant workflows that's only running for a certain period of time. So instead of investing in a large, expensive live production environment that you're only using a couple hours a week and the rest of the time lies dormant, you're going to be renting that infrastructure in the cloud just for those hours you actually need it. So potentially, it's going to be very financially attractive to do live production in the cloud. The question is the technology mature enough yet in the cloud to do this? And it certainly wasn't true 2 years ago. There are some lightweight production capabilities that have been in the cloud for a little while here. I'm using OBS right now, as a matter of fact, and vMix is a very popular system as well. So these systems are out there. But we've seen in the last year, and certainly accelerated by COVID, the release of a couple really nice, new, interesting looking live production systems in the cloud, and some more on the way. So we think that the technology really is going to mature very quickly here, where we're going to see live production being possible in the cloud. Having said that, will we do major sporting events in the cloud in the very near future? Will you, certainly like the Super Bowl, or a big golf tournament? Absolutely not. Those things are too valuable, too complex, too big to move to the cloud tomorrow. But the other thing we should be thinking about is, should we be moving it the same way we do it today, or should we be doing it something entirely different in the cloud? And so I'm going to talk about that a lot in one of my last presentations here. And I have some really interesting ideas to show you, because the cloud could potentially let us do live production in a way we could never do otherwise. So stay tuned for that one. And Chris, hope you'll join us for that. Thanks for the question. So other questions, how should I choose my cloud provider? Well, that's a tough question. People often choose a cloud provider either because it's the one they know about, or because economically they've done some analysis and they get, or the cloud providers offer them a really good discount and a good deal. But there are a lot of variables involved there. And it's not just what the cost of the cloud is, but it's also what services are available, what experience and skills your people have, and what software you can run in it. Because to make your software run well in the cloud requires that you actually adapt it to really get the best out of a cloud. And so we'll talk about that in one of our upcoming episodes as well, about how you should choose your cloud provider, because it's more than just picking the provider. And the last question I've got here right now I can get to before you run out of time. I think most of all it's a trust issue. This is more of a comment. Testing in the cloud does not guarantee consistent results. So that's true. Short-term testing will not give you consistent results. I've often done months-long testing when I'm standing up systems to really look at the performance and look at the reliability. But the real key around that is to build the systems that build that trust for you. So it's about building the resiliency, the reliability, the diversity, and how you design your cloud architecture to give you the trust you want. I absolutely believe that the cloud can be more reliable than anything you could build on premises today. But that takes a lot of work to get there. You need to understand what you're doing the same way you need to understand what you're doing on premises today. And security is one of those things that people think they might be scared of the cloud because of security, but it's in all likelihood, if you do it right, it'll be far more secure than anything you would ever build on premises. So think about that. We'll be talking about that more in future episodes. So definitely we'll come back to that. We'll be talking about how to build reliable, resilient systems that you can trust that are secure in the cloud. All right, we've been running a bit long, so I'm sorry to get to all your questions. Be sure to put them in the chat, and we'll email you answers if we don't answer them on the next episode. So look forward to seeing you soon, and thanks for joining us.